morning, everyone. Myself, Kunal Kursija. I recently, have came across this topic. Not recently, I would say 6 months back or 7 months back when I was working on the project. And, while reviewing one of developers' merge request, I thought, this code looks like, a bit unreadable. So while reviewing the code, I was, searching for solutions to make the code better, basically the PHPUnit test. And it was then when I came across these PHPUnit data providers. And, I suggested to the developer and we implemented it. And that is it, how I learned this topic. So the topic for the day is PHPUnit data providers. And we'll basically learn in this today's sessions about, how the dirty tests are written and how you can make those dirty tests, look good, and basically use PHP data unit data providers for that. So let's begin. Before we jump into the topic, I like to do a self promotion and advertising, you can say. So myself, Kunal Kursija, I am based out of Mumbai, and I have been working with Accelerant for around 5 years. I'm working as a Drupal staff engineer, and if you want to get in touch with me anytime, you can reach me on LinkedIn. And if you want to check my Drupal.org profile, here are the links. And one quick note: we are hiring. If you want to apply at Accelerant, do get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Moving on, with the boring part, the theory part. Let's talk about code abstraction. Now, code abstraction, it is a very important principle of, object-oriented programming in general, where you are basically, you might have come across scenarios where you are working in large teams and you are building on various features. That is, each member of the team is working on various features, and you generally, tend to write duplicate code or repetitive code across modules and across files. At the later stage, of the project, you might come to realize that, okay, here are some common pieces of the functionality or, the common code that we have done repetition across multiple files. And at that time, you basically go in a technical depth and you basically tend to remove, basically abstract out the code from various files and extract it as a separate file and then reuse across multiple files. So basically, an example for that would be services in Drupal. Now, services are, some objects that we create in Drupal so that, they are responsible for handling repetitive tasks. For example, there are 10 forms in Drupal. Each one of them is accepting an email address. And let's say at the end of the submit button, you have to send out an email to the input email address. Now, one way to do that job would be to, write the mail functionality in every submit handler and send out the mail. But another way would be to create a service for the mail sending logic. And then in the form submit handler, you basically reuse the service and call the mail sending function. So you wrote the code once in a service and you reuse the code via dependency injection or global objects, up to you, in the form submit handlers. So that is the importance of code abstraction. It helps you, increase the readability. It helps you achieve reusability of code. Now, PHPUnit and code abstraction. Now, you might ask, these are simple tests that we write in the test classes, and why do we need code abstraction? Now, the reason for that is, we are already doing code abstraction in PHPUnit test in the form of traits. When you're writing PHPUnit test, you might come across that the test classes are using traits. Now, traits are basically, structures which contains your helper functions, because PHP does not support, or Drupal is not supporting multiple inheritance at this time. Now, traits are one of the way, but I'll walk you through how PHP unit data providers can also provide you the abstraction. Let's go ahead and let's talk about PHPUnit data providers. In a very short form, PHPUnit data providers are nothing but functions that provide input and input data and the expected output from the test function. So they provide input data and the expected outcome to the test function, so that your test function iterates through that data and checks if the input and output are matching or not. That's it. That is what PHPUnit data providers are. Now you might be wondering, what are you talking about? Like, what are these functions? How can we know like what functions are you talking about? So I agree. A very good way to understand them will be via a demo. So let's run some tests. Let's see how we write, how we can write some dirty test, how we can, improve on the test using data providers. So I'll come out of the presentation. So I have two things now. The first one is, so this is a Drupal 9 installation that I have created. Now on this site, we won't be doing anything. I just need to show you two things. The first one is, let's go to people, roles. So I have created two roles today. The first one is editor. The second one is moderator. Now different users on the site will end up having one or two of both of these roles. Apart from this, I have created a custom module. So let me show you. Here it is. So the custom module is called as DrupalCamp India Refresh 2022. Now this module basically consists of some custom routes, some PHPUnit tests that we are going to execute today. So nothing more on this site. We might not come back to this at all. So let's go to the IDE, which is going to be our playground for today's session. So now this is a repository that is running the Drupal 9 site that we have created. The directory is called as DIA Refresh 2022. Now, as I mentioned, I have created a custom module. Let's go to modules, custom, DIA Refresh 2022. Here it is. The module is already installed. Let me quickly walk you through the module. What is it having and the test. So this module has an info file which defines this module. That's it. The module is called as this, the package is this, and the basic information or the metadata of the module. Let me close this. Let's open the routing YML. Now pay attention to this because all our tests are going to use these routes. So just a second. All right. Now the first route is called as DIA refresh 2022.editing. The route defines a path /editing, and this is the controller that is responsible for returning the output or response of this particular controller. We have a requirement here which says that this path, that is /editing, should be accessible by users who have either the editor role or the moderator role. That's it. That's the first route. The second route defines this particular machine name, which is DIA refresh 2022.moderating. Now the path it's defining is /moderating. We have the controller that is responsible for sending the output or the response for this particular route. And the requirement here is that the users who have only the role of a moderator will be able to access this particular path. So yeah, this is these are the routes. I'll take you through the controllers. The controllers are pretty simple, and here these are editing.php and the moderating.php. So I'll first open the class that is responsible for sending or creating the output for /editing part, which is editing.php. Now pretty basic stuff here. I won't go into details. It is simply returning the response that contents of page /editing. It's a string. Same for the moderating.php. We only have a string that is being returned by this particular controller function. And that would be it. This is, all the information that you should be aware about this module. Time for us to jump into the test now. In today's session, we are going to leverage Drupal testing traits because they are pretty fast to run, and it will help us in taking less time for the test execution. So I have used Drupal testing traits. Let's jump into the first test, which is a dirty test. It is called as dirty test.php. It is defining some things. It is using data. It is not using data providers by any means. So let me walk you through the code. All right. So we have defined this particular test class in this namespace, and it is extending. This test class is extending the existing site-based class. We are using a trait now. This trait is called as user creation trait. It is going to help us in creating users, logging them in, etc. So basically, this is a type of code abstraction. We won't go into details of this trait, but you should know that it provides us some functionality that we are going to reuse in today's test. We have a protected property called as logged in user. Now, when any test is executed, the first function that gets called from this file is the setup function. Now, in the setup function, we are going to write basic stuff like create the user, log that user in, etc. So we are writing this first particular line where we are creating a user which does not have any permissions, which does not have any roles, and this arrow random string, it is basically the username. So we are creating a user with a username. Once the user is created, we are logging the user in. That's it. That is what the setup function is doing. Now, after that, we have the very first test that is getting executed. It's called test editor access. So what we are doing in this particular test is we are logging we are taking the logged in user and we are assigning the user a role called editor. Okay, you might have seen on the side that we created this editor and the moderator role. So to this user who is logged in, we are assigning the editor role. Then we are checking whether the user has access to the path /editing or not. And after that, we are checking whether the user has access to the path /moderating or not. So that is the first test. And in the second test, same thing. What we are doing over here is we are assigning the role moderator to the user. And after that, we are checking whether the user has the access to path /editing as well as the path /moderating. So that is it. Let me run this test for you. I'll go to the terminal. I'll say vendor bin PHPUnit existing site, and then dirty test.php. So I have configured PHPUnit to run these tests. I won't go into the configuration details. Let's just run these tests. So let me hit the enter button. Now the test is executing. We can see that 2 tests were executed. There were approximately 12 assertions and the test passed. Now I'll also click on this particular file and say, okay, before doing that, let's click these links. I have clicked the first link. Now, user is on the user /login page. So basically these screenshots are taken, or these HTML files were created when these tests were getting executed. So first users were created. Now users are on the login page. This is the first test that is getting executed. So let me hit the next button now. User is created and the user is logged in. The user has this particular username. After that, let me hit the next. Now, as you can see, user is on the /editing path and user is able to access this particular path. So first we created the test where we were assigning the user a role of editor and checking if the user is able to access the /editing path and the /moderating path. So /editing is accessible, so this assertion passed. Now let's go ahead. Now, as you can see, user is trying to access the page /moderating. Here it is. If you can see, this path is /moderating, and user tried to access it, but access denied was thrown. All right, so that is it about the first test that we executed. Now the second test, again, the repetition. User is on the login page, then user is logged in. They will try to access the /editing path. Here it is, and the moderating path actually. So like the contents were accessible. Now let me close this. So this was, a sort of a dirty test where we created two test functions. We did a repetitive logic where we were assigning a role to the user. Then we were checking whether, the users have the access to these particular paths or not. If you see, the input data remained like, were the strings and nothing else. So let's see how we can make this test better by using PHPUnit data providers. Now, to do that, I'll close this particular file first. Let's open the file spick and span test.php. Let's quickly go through this particular test class as well. We are defining the class spick and span test, which it is extending the existing site base. This remains same, where we are using the trait. We are creating the user in the setup function, and we are logging the user into the site. Now, here comes the change. So let me show you the test function, how it has changed from the dirty test class that we saw earlier. So we have this function called as test access. It is accepting two arguments. The first one is role, and the second one is an array called as pages. Now, in this test, the user is assigned a role. We are saving the user. We are basically assigning a role to the user, which is passed as an argument over here. After that, we are going through each page that is provided to us. We are going through the array, and we are going through the page and basically checking if the user has access to that particular page or not. And according to that, we are doing the assertion. So you might ask, where is the data coming from? You have passed all these, variables. Where is the data of these variables coming from? The answer to that is data provider. So data providers, as I mentioned, are the function which are responsible for passing the input data and the expected outcome to these test functions. Now, the data provider for this particular test is page provider. Let's go to, the denotation to say that a test is using data provider is this particular. So @data provider is what tells PHPUnit that it is supposed to get the input and the expected outcome from this particular function. Now, these functions are public functions. These are basically arrays of arrays. As you can see, in this function, we have defined this particular array where the array has two elements. The first one is this, where the first property is editor. Then editor has access to this particular, this is an array where we are passing the pages and the expected outcome or the HTTP status codes. So first one is URL is a property, and we are passing the value as editing. Code is another property of this particular array, and we are passing the value to 100. Same thing goes for this. So what will happen is, okay, before that, let's run the test. I'll go to terminal and let me clear this out. I'll say Spick and span test.php. Let's hit enter. Now I won't go into the links and explain you, but as you can see, the test passed, but you might not be able to understand like how this got executed. So let me do one thing. Right click on the file. Let's say run. So the tests are running. Now, this is, from this you might be able to understand all this better. So when this test was executed, what happened was at first the setup function was executed, which created a user and logged in the user basically. Now after that, test access test was executed, basically this function. Now this test access test got executed twice. First, it was executed with the data set 0, which is over here. This is the data set 0. After that, this test was again executed with the data set 1. Now this is the data set 1. And yeah, let's say when it got executed with the data set 0, what the data that was passed to our test function was this editor in the property role. After that, the array was passed, which is this, as the second argument to this pages variable. Then after that, what Drupal did was the same logic. Now they logged in the user, they basically looped through these pages array, and they checked if the user has access to that particular page or not. Now with one function, we were able to basically use data providers and like make our test look good. Earlier, let's go to the earlier test. We were doing the repetitive logic, but we wrote multiple tests for it. Now the change is we wrote one test. You can write multiple tests. You can write one test and you can pass numerous data sets to your test function, which your test function can check. So these are like Spick and this is how you can make your test look good or neat and clean. And if this example was difficult to understand, let me take you through another example. I'll close both these files. I have written a simple test that is going to check if the input data, when it is summed, it is matching the expected outcome or the addition or not. Let's close this. Now this test is defining a test function called as test addition. It takes three variables. The first one is integer 1, the second one is integer 2, and then it is taking the input as expected value. Then in the assertion, what we are doing is we are checking this arrow assert equals. The first argument is expected, and in the second argument, we are basically computing the sum of both the first arguments, that is integer 1 and integer 2, and checking if it is matching the variable expected. This test addition test is making use of data providers. It is denoted by this annotation, and the data provider that is going to provide the data to our test function is number provider. Again, it is a public function. Then it is passing an array of array. As you can see, the first property is this. The second value of the array is this, and the third one is this. As you can see, 1 will equals to 2. So the first and second arguments are our inputs, and we are also passing the expected outcome. Same thing goes for this. 2 plus 2 will be 4, 3 plus 3 will be 6, and so on. Let's execute this test. Let me hit the clear. Now I'll hit enter. As you can see, the test passed, but let's see how data provider passed the data to our test function. Let me right click on this file and we'll say run this particular test. So test addition function was called, using 3 data sets. The first one was data set 0, data set 1, and then the data set 2. So this is data set 0 for you. This is data set 1. This is data set 2. So yeah, that is how, we can write data providers, which in turn are going to pass data. Yeah, as I was saying, like these data sets were used to execute our test. Now, apart from this, let's talk about these data sets. Now, when your data provider is passing, let's say 100 sets of data, and by chance, if your tests are failing, then how will you know that, what data set failed? So the answer to that is, we should pay attention to these data set IDs 0, 1, 2. But again, these IDs, when your array has, let's say 100 of items, and you got a message, let's say the test failed with data set 77. Now you are not going to go through the number of lines and basically scroll to your data set 77. That would be difficult to debug. So one suggestion for that would be, always name your data sets. Basically use associative arrays. Let me give you an example for that, how we can name our data sets. I'll say set 1. Then, okay, before that, what I was saying was, it could be difficult to track what data set ID 1, 2 or 77 is. Let me say 2 plus 2 equals 6. Okay, let's run this test. Now, when we run this, we got the message that this particular test with data set #1 failed, asserting that 4 matches expected 6. So this is the error that you got. Sometime it would be difficult to track, if you have complex array structures, it would be difficult to track these IDs. So a quick solution for that would be make use of associative arrays and name your data sets like this. I'll say copy. Now I'll change this value to 2 and 3. So what you have done now is you have written set 1, set 2 and set 3 as the set names basically. Earlier they were 0, 1, 2. Now let's hit the test again. I'll hit enter. What you can see now is data set set 2 failed. So I'll right click again. Let's execute the same test. Over here you can see when the test was called with data set 1, it passed. When it was called using data set 2, it failed, and the set 3 passed. One more thing would be you can, let's say our set 2 is failing. Now you have to fix this. How can you execute the test only with the data set 2? To do that, what you have to do is, I'll say clear. You have to say filter. Then after filter, you have to say test addition, and you have to pass the set ID. Let's say we want to only execute our test using the set 2. So what we can do over here is filter, execute our test addition function, and pass the data set 2. Not 2, actually it would be set 2 because our ID is set 2. Had it been, this, there were no associative arrays, then we would have written #2 instead of #set2. So let me hit enter now. Okay, something is okay now. So we don't use hash for, when we have associative arrays, we use @. So let me hit enter now. So the test was executed only with the set 2. As you can see, we executed one test, there were 1 assertions. But if you're not passing, let's say this filter data, let me hit enter now. All our tests will be executed. As you can see, 3 tests were executed, 3 assertions were done, and 1 failure. Whereas for this, you only executed test 2. It says test 1, assertion 1, and failure 1. Now, let's say we have to make this value 4. We found the problem and we need to fix it. Let's execute the set 2 again. it will say that the test passed. So that's how, you can make use of these named properties, or, make use of associative arrays and fix the issues. You can also use regex when you are filtering. So let's say I will say @dot star set. So I have to run, let's say, I have to pass data from these data providers, but we need to only pass the sets which match this particular name. I have written the name set, which is set. Let's hit enter. As you can see, the array was executed. We have 3 tests and 3 assertions. Let's write something else. Let's say instead of set, we write max 3. Let's execute the test again. As you can see, the data sets which the data properties which matched this the key set in the associative properties were only passed to our test. Now, I was talking about earlier that, what if you're not making use of associative arrays? So let me delete these. Now, currently the data sets are 0, 1, and 2. If you have to, execute a specific test when you're not, you have to execute a test using a specific data provider for cases where your data providers are not using associative keys. In that scenario, what you can do is, instead of @, you can write hash and the set ID. So this one is the 0, this one is 1, and this one is 2. So let's say I want to execute, let's say 2 + 2, 4 set only. So I'll say test addition hash 1. So yeah, this is how, you can execute one particular data set when it is not when it does not have the associative keys. You can also execute 0 to 2. We want to execute, let's say, there are let's say 3 + 4, 7. Let's say there are 4 proper values in the array, and you want to only execute the first 3. So what you can do is, you can say test addition hash 0 to 2, and let's hit enter, and it will say 3 assertions were made. But let's say if you want to say 0 to 3, then it says that the test was executed 4 times and 4 assertions were made. I have covered all these things. Just one quick thing that I would like to tell you is, you can write test like this. Let's say test addition test I recently tried this, so since we have a quick few minutes, so we have to write, let's say, $expected int1 plus $int2. Now, what I'm trying to do over here is, an alternative to using data providers is this. So I'll tell you, I won't waste time in writing the whole doc. So I'll say test with. So this is the annotation that you can, make use of, and say 1, 1, 2. Now let's expect the integer 1 as an argument, then integer 2, then integer 3. Sorry, not integer 3, it would be $expected. Let me hit the enter. Let's execute this test. So before that, let me clear the cache. Let's execute the whole test file. So as you can see, I mean, what happened in the backend was like, just a second, how can I hide this? Okay, I'll run this test now. So I have executed this test. As you can see over here is this test addition test with function, or the test was called with data set 0. Now data set 0 would be this one, 1, 1, 2. If there was another data set, then it would look like this, 1, 2, 1, 3 would be like 4. Let's execute the test again. So as you can see, data set 0, data set 1. Basically, this is JSON that I'm passing in the test with property. This is an alternative to using data providers, but I would recommend not using it because this syntax is not very friendly. Instead of it, abstract your data in a separate function or a data provider function that will also support syntax highlighting for you, for example. So I mean, that is an easy way to write code. That would be it. I think we are already nearing the end. So let me come to chat for any questions. So any questions?
Kunal, Jaideep this side.
Yeah, Jaideep.
Yes. So first of all, thank you for showing this, demoing this session. It was quite good, and you have perfectly, abstracted all the things that you don't need to show, and perfectly explained what all things your module does, and how you have written all these tests, right? So congratulations for that. So I kind of got the answer, after I had raised the hands, after all what you have said afterward, right? So I just wanted to if you can re-elaborate on that particular aspect, right? So you previously showed what a dirty test is, right, and how we can write a, say, non-dirty test or a clean test, whatever we can say, right, through the use of data providers, right? So say for example, if we write a straightforward test, right, but instead of calling the data providers, what if we have we create a giant array, array of arrays which contains all the data inside the test itself, right? So that also will solve the purpose for us, right? So I kind of got the idea, how we are the way we are identifying each set of data in a certain way, and how we can run these tests separately. But if you can elaborate a little bit more on why we call it why we call the other tests as dirty, and the data suppose if you write a test using data provider, then we don't call them dirty, right? Given the fact that we can write so many, like we can, in a test class file, we can have so many different test functions, and accordingly we can have so many different data providers for each of those tests, right? So if you can elaborate a little on that one.
So I'll be very brief. I mean, I'll be very short on this in the interest of time. So I say, when we write test classes, and then you have test functions in them. Now, if you're not, using data providers, your test functions could be, let's say, 100 lines of code, where you are, let's say, creating 2 users, assigning them different roles, trying to see if they have access to 20 pages. And you will do that for each and every page and each and every user. Now, if you're not using data providers, you will have to hard code your page values, your user roles, etc. in one particular function. Now, you will write the test, your test will execute. But in future, if your test is, failing, for example, it would be difficult to track. That would be the first thing. And the second thing would be, if you have not written the test and someone else wrote it, at first it will be difficult to read what is exactly happening in the test. I would say data providers help you, write your code better, your code readability increases, and at the same time, you are, abstracting out the unwanted things and making it look good with the help of data providers.
Yep. Thanks, Kunal. Yep.
Okay. There's a message from Mohan. Can we get the code that you've shown in the demo?
So the code is accessible over here. So if you want slides and if you want code, let me paste this particular text over the chat for you. Sometimes Zoom is a bit difficult to operate, especially this toolbar. So I'll say everyone, and let me paste the slides and code. So here are the slides. Here are, the code is there as well. Any further questions?
Right. I think this was great.
Okay.
Try capturing slides of all speakers and share with everyone. Please, watch this space on the Twitter and LinkedIn DIA handles.
And one last thing, I would like to thank the Drupal India Association for organizing this particular this hybrid event where we are meeting. I think we last met in October 2019, so roughly around 2.5 years from then we have met. And thank you for organizing this event and bringing us all together. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session and listening to me.